Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Name of Pod. Andrea Lee here, back with Alastair. This week we're just gonna have some fun. We love to talk about music, and we have a few different categories of our own that we would like to just point out some of our favorites and just kind of have a fun conversation. So, hello, Alastair.
Andrea, it's always nice to be here and to talk to you.
I'm glad to hear you say that, my friend. So as we were getting ready for this, we were talking about some fun things. So let's start with like our favorite covers. Um, bands that we love or just like obscure, maybe not necessarily even that obscure covers of songs that we just think are amazing. Do you want to go first?
Why don't you lead the way? You start with one.
All right. So here we go. One of my absolute favorites is the Flaming Lips cover of Black Sabbath's War Pigs. Um, it is one of the best covers ever. I got to see them perform it live at Bonnaroo many, many years ago. They started the show with it, and everybody just went totally bonkers. It was great. Um, and if our listeners haven't heard that, most of my friends have probably made you listen to it at this point. But if you have not heard that one, go look it up because it's amazing.
I
Um,
don't know if I know the original song, actually.
oh, it's just well, you know the song War Pigs, right?
No, I don't think so. No.
Oh no. Okay. So you're gonna have to listen to Black Sabbath and then you're gonna have to listen to the
Okay.
Flaming Lips cover Black
Okay.
Sabbath.
Sure. Yeah.
It's a
I haven't
it's
heard a
a
lot of stuff by Black
fantastic
Sabbath.
It's a fantastic rock song. It just really is in its own
Okay.
right. And the way the Flaming Lips do it in their style, it fits. It really fits a lot better than you would think. And it's incredible. I just love it. Oh, but here's one that I know you know. Um, when Nirvana covered David Bowie's Man Who Sold the World.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
I played
Very
that one for
famous
my
cover.
Yeah, I played that one for my dad once when like we were in Nirvana, into Nirvana and stuff in high school. And my dad's the one who got me into David Bowie. So I was like, oh, here's a good way to introduce my dad to Nirvana. And it worked. My dad likes Nirvana.
What was interesting about that cover, I thought, was because I didn't know that was a Bowie song when I first heard it. I didn't know much of
Oh,
Bowie's
wow.
stuff. But
Yeah.
because the kinds of lyrics that Kurt Cobain used to write, I listened to it and I thought at first I thought this is a Nirvana song, just one that I hadn't heard yet. Um, and and that was interesting. I mean, finding out it wasn't one of his songs, but then kind of hearing Bowie's lyrics and thinking, oh, his lyrical style was very influential on a number of different musicians that I liked.
Yeah.
And it took me a while to get into Nirvana's music, but I always thought Kurt Cobain himself was very interesting, and I always liked the lyrics that he wrote. I was always more of a fan of In Utero because I thought that the lyrics were sort of spikier. Um,
Oh, yeah, yeah. That record's amazing.
but just earlier
Excuse me.
today, I had to I answered a question that someone posed online. They had like three or four different albums. They said you could only choose two. So of the albums, I forget what they all were, but I chose OK Computer and In Utero. Um,
Nice.
but yeah, I like that cover. And then, of course, I mean, on that album as well, not In Utero, but on the Unplugged, they also
Oh,
have the
yeah.
the famous cover of Where Did You Sleep Last Night,
Yes. Yes. Oh,
which
and
is that a Lead Belly song, I think.
oh, yes. And
I
then,
think it's
oh,
Lead Belly, yeah.
there is that because also on that album, talking about amazing covers, also on that Unplugged record is their cover of Jesus Doesn't Want Me for a Sunbeam.
Oh yeah, is that the Vaselines?
Was it, or is it the Meat Puppets?
Might be the Meat Puppets,
I
actually.
think it's the Meat Puppets. Someone
Okay.
correct us if we're wrong in the comments later. I think it's the Meat
Yeah,
Puppets.
yeah.
But
Um,
yeah, talk about some amazing Nirvana covers. There you
well,
go.
they also, not on that album, but they also covered Molly's Lips.
Oh, that's right. Yep.
I
There's
can't
another
remember
really
what
good one.
band. what band originally did Molly's Lips?
I
Is that
don't
the
recall.
Meatpuppets?
It
That
might
might be the
be.
Vaseline. I don't
Oh,
know.
yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, yeah,
I get
yeah.
some of those bands mixed up.
I do too because it was all like the same time and we were young
Yeah,
and I
yeah,
don't really remember.
yeah,
But see, that's what I mean though about like when a band covers a song and maybe you're not necessarily familiar with, the original, but it sounds so much like it belongs to the band that you don't really question it when you first hear it. So
yeah,
like if you didn't know that War Pigs was a Black Sabbath song, I promise you would think it's a Flaming Lips song. Like Man Who Sold the World, you said you weren't familiar with Bowie, right? So like well, at least not that song. So like, but it sounds enough like it's a Kurt Cobain song, right?
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
I think another one in that category is Florence and the Machine did an amazing cover of Robert Palmer's Addicted to Love. And I've always liked that song anyway. Don't care, not afraid to say it. And her cover is incredible. I mean, that voice singing that song, it's awesome.
See, the
I just
cover that she was better known for over here was
yeah.
her cover of I can't remember what it was called now. Well, I don't know the name of the band. It was a song called "You Got the Love," and it was a
Oh, you got
dance
the love.
song.
That's right. That's right. That's
Yeah,
right.
yeah,
Yes,
that
yes,
was the
yes,
cover.
yes.
And
Yes.
it was an interesting cover. And there was like a, and do you remember there was a brief period, end of the 90s, sort of maybe beginning of the 2000s, when indie bands would cover pop songs? And it started with
Hmm.
the band Travis covering Baby One More Time.
Oh, I love that
And it
cover.
was like live on Radio One. And
Yeah,
they
it
covered
was.
it. And it was a really unexpected thing to cover, but it seemed to work.
Oh, it did because I remember being like in the coffee shop, where we would all go play open mic or whatever when we were first getting started. We're like in our early 20s or whatever. And we're at the coffee shop one night and there was this girl playing acoustic guitar. She sounded great. We're all watching her. And she starts playing that Travis, like the Travis version of Baby One More Time. And it sounded so nice that we didn't realize it was that song until like she got to the chorus.
Yeah. Yeah.
And and we're like, "Oh, no way, she just did that." And the even better part was she was at least honest enough to tell us that she had been inspired by the band Travis to do that cover because we were all just like, "Oh my God, you're brilliant." She's like, "I can't take credit for it." She could have. We wouldn't have known any better.
it was uh it was all the rage for a while. I don't know if it's still a thing, but certainly around that kind of time. It was around the time when a lot of the indie bands they're quite sort of acoustic based
Hmm.
with bits of electrics laid over the top. Like I think it was kind of inspired a little bit by OK Computer.
Hmm.
Um, there were let me think. So, I mean, I suppose one of the all-time great covers was Jeff Buckley's cover of Hallelujah.
Oh, that
And
is,
he really made that
yeah,
his own, I think,
absolutely.
to the point where it's definitively it sometimes you get that where someone covers a song and it just becomes their
Oh,
song.
absolutely. Well, yeah,
Yeah.
like all along the Watchtower, Jimi
Like All
Hendrix.
Along the Watchtower. That's another good
Yeah.
example. Yeah.
Yeah, where
One
it's
that
just
I've
it
never I know
becomes their
we
song.
I know we're sort of talking about our favorite covers here, so this is going to be a bit controversial, but one cover that I've never really got into was Johnny Cash's cover of Hurt by Nine Inch Nails. I
Oh,
love the
I
original so much, and I just
I
felt
do
like
too.
Cash just took all the substance out of it.
Oh, see,
And I'm
I
not a
see,
big Johnny
and
Cash fan myself anyway.
well, we can agree to disagree on that because I mean, I have a black guitar named Johnny,
Okay.
but yeah, I love Johnny Cash. But I when I heard his cover of Hurt, it was like, see if you that's one of those things. If you're into Johnny Cash, you know a little bit about his life and his story. Um, yeah. him singing that song, and he recorded, I mean, he died a few months later. And so it was like the power behind it was, yeah, agree to disagree on that one.
We'll have to, because I mean, the impact that the Nine Inch Nails song had on me. Hearing that, I mean, the one thing that I really disliked about the Cash version is he got rid of the little the kind of discordant note that Trent Reznor plays.
Oh yeah, well
Uh,
yeah, his style
just
is
a
just a little
lyric.
different. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But see it, and I well, it is a fact that that cover made Trent Reznor cry. So
I
there's
suppose
that.
Trent, if Trent Reznor liked it, then I didn't get it. Like I've never really got Johnny Cash. The only thing of his that I liked, I suppose this is actually technically a cover, um, Highwayman by the Highwaymen,
Oh yeah.
which I don't remember who did the original song, but it's I'm trying to remember who was in that. It was like a sort of a brief super group, and
It
Johnny Cash
was,
was
yeah,
one of
yeah.
the four
Yep.
members.
Oh God, I'm gonna lose so much credit for not being able to pull all the members of the Highwaymen right out of my head right now.
Mhm.
Sorry, kids, don't get mad at me. Oh, well, okay, here's one. Maybe you've heard or maybe you haven't, but we're both big Radiohead fans. Have you
Yeah,
ever heard Tom York singing Nobody Does It Better?
yeah, I've heard a record, but
It's
um,
one of the
I
greatest
think I
things
have.
ever.
I wonder whether I
There
have.
was a
Like,
there was a
I
live
wonder if it's one of those
recording.
things that everyone believes that they've heard, but in fact, it only maybe happened once or twice.
And no,
And
it only it
I'm sure I've heard it.
if you have heard it, it's a bootleg recording. I have it. Statute of limitations has passed on that one, I can admit it. But it's
Okay.
like it's like from an old live show. So yeah,
Yeah.
if unless you were at that show or someone found a copy of it for you, no, you wouldn't have
Yes.
heard it. But
What
it,
era was that? Was that Ben's era, or was that before then?
oh, I think it was a little bit later. I want to say maybe late 90s, early 2000s. He did like
I was. It
it
was
was some like
it was
charity show or
definitely
something.
before Kid A. Like I was
Yeah.
aware that it
It was,
existed when
yeah, it
I
was
first
before
found
Kid A.
Radiohead about 96, 97. So
So yeah, it was probably yeah, so
yeah.
it was in there somewhere. And nobody does it
But then
better. Great
there's
song, him singing it even better.
there's the version on YouTube of it's like three covers in one that Radiohead did of Joy Division's Ceremony,
Oh yeah.
and then the Headmaster Ritual by the Smiths, and then
Yes.
there's another one that they do, and I can't remember what it
Well,
is.
Tom is famously a Joy Division fan, so that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah, but I don't remember what the third song is that they cover of those three. Like they cover three songs, and there's the Smiths song and uh the Joy Division song. I don't remember what the third one is. If I can remember it, then I'll say. But it's interesting because, of course, like they did that, they recorded that around the time I think when they were doing King of Limbs, although it
Oh
might have
yeah.
been in Rainbows. I think it was King of Limbs. It was one of their. It's like a studio outtake or something, and it's on video on YouTube.
Mm.
But
It,
it's really interesting, and you can tell the influence that Johnny Marr has had on Ed O'Brien.
oh yeah, absolutely. Oh, they're really oh, here's a good one. Here's a good one. And this will get us into another thing that we want to talk about. As far as like songs that are really, really connected with a movie. And not soundtracks, because we did talk about that once, but
Yeah, yeah.
um Gary Jules' cover of Tears for Fears Mad
Oh,
World
yeah, that was a really interesting
is
version of that was a really
so beautiful.
yeah.
And shout out Gary Jules. He lives in Nashville. Boop, boop. Um, and he's actually this is kind of cool because I would have brought this one up anyway, but it's like the 20th anniversary of that cover coming out. And it kind of really changed a lot of things for him. But
Thinking, yeah,
that's
it is. Yeah.
and it's and that's the Donnie Darko movie. Was where that
Yes.
song was famously used as the I think the
Yeah.
intro and the outro for the film. But I've had the pleasure of seeing Gary Jules perform. He, of course, will play that song because everybody wants to hear it. His music is fantastic, but it's like he knows everybody wants to hear that song. He's no dummy. So he
Kind of
played
equal
it, and it
success
was
of
just the
that.
room just went
Oh, I'm not talking
silent.
about okay, I'm not talking about Gary Jules. I'm talking about the on an aside, the director of Donnie Darko.
Oh yeah.
I don't know what else he has directed that has got him as much recognition as that film.
Oh yeah, 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 yeah. But yeah, when we
And it's
yeah,
sort
I
of the
see.
film that
Yeah.
introduced Jake Gyllenhaal to the world as well.
Yeah, that well, that too. And the movie's just so great. Anyway, I mean it's a fantastic film. Um, but yeah, when we were yeah, Gary Jules, he yeah, his music's fantastic, but he knows everybody wants to hear that song. So he played it at the concert and the room just went silent. And it was just such an incredible moment. It was so beautiful. But I would say that, that song is very, I can't think of that song without thinking of that movie, you
Yeah,
know.
yeah,
Um, but I mean, also famously, can anyone hear um Don't You Forget About Me by Simple Minds and not immediately think of the Breakfast Club?
yeah,
You know.
yeah. Mm.
Do you have
Uh,
some favorites in that
yeah, there
area
are some certain songs,
arena?
or The Power of Love, without thinking of Back to the Future.
Yes. That's a
Which,
good
by the way, I mean, I found out recently that that song was actually written for the film.
right.
Like
Yeah, see, that's another beautiful
it
thing.
wasn't just a
Yeah.
film that happened to be in Hugo Lewis's back catalogue.
Right, right. Yeah, exactly. That's great. Um, or like even more uh much more currently, the Billie Eilish song that was written for the Barbie movie, What Was I Made For, is absolutely gorgeous.
I'm not really
It's
the best person to ask about the Barbie film, to be honest. There was very little about it that I enjoyed.
well, but
I
that
didn't really pay
song
much attention to her song. I saw that she won an Oscar for it, though.
and I mean it because it's a beautiful song. It's just really on its own. It's just a really beautiful song. Um, a gorgeous ballad, but it was that was written for the film. Um, like isn't like every single James Bond theme specific it's like specifically written for the
Yes,
movie. Somebody
I think,
gets that
yeah,
gig and they have to write the song for the film, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah. So, like, do you have a favorite James Bond song?
Um, ooh, I have to think about this. GoldenEye, was that the Tina Turner one?
Yeah,
That's
that was
pretty
the Tina
good.
Turner one. You know who wrote that,
Yeah.
though, don't you?
I don't know who wrote it.
Bono wrote it.
Bono wrote it. Oh, see, there you
Bono wrote
go.
GoldenEye. Yeah,
That's perfect.
yeah.
Bono wrote
So,
it. Tina
yeah.
performed it. Yeah, I'm happy with my choice.
Um, and I remember at the time seeing the film and thinking that GoldenEye would be a person because in the song, um, she's singing about someone,
Oh,
referring to
sure.
them as GoldenEye, and it's actually, I think it's a gun, GoldenEye. I can't quite remember the film, but
Yeah, I don't really
no, I
remember
really
I
liked
love that
that. Was in
song.
the kind of the mid to late '90s, the Pierce Brosnan era, and
Hmm.
I remember um, the follow-up film. Let me think, what was it called? There was Tomorrow Never Dies, and Sheryl Crow did the song for that, and I liked that.
I
And
like
then
that one
after
too.
that, one of the better Bond themes, but kind of an unsung, was it underrated Bond theme, was "Garbage Is the World Is Not Enough."
Oh, that was really good. And I like Garbage too. I've always been a fan of
Yeah.
Shirley Manson, for
And it was
sure.
around the time of their second album as well, which is their high point.
Oh yeah, that's when they were like exploding.
Oh yeah,
D-
yeah, I remember
Oh,
that. 98 and 99.
fun one about Shirley Manson. At one point, I'm gonna get the name of the show wrong, but at one point there was a show, it was based on the Terminator,
Yeah,
and
the
she
Sarah Connor
played
Chronicles.
Yeah, the serial, that's what it was. Thank you. And because I couldn't remember what it's called. And she played like an evil Terminator.
She
Shirley
played the
Manson.
same. She played a female version of the Terminator, the baddie Terminator, the liquid metal Terminator in
Yeah,
Terminator
yeah.
2.
And that song, the theme song for that show was called Samson and Delilah, performed by Miss Shirley Manson. So there you go.
Oh,
There's another one.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I managed to see Garbage in 90. Oh, when was it? I think it was either 97 or 98. I think it was 98 at the Reading Festival in England, and it was really good. And they hadn't yet released, it would have been 98 actually, because they hadn't yet released their second album. They were just about to, but they'd released the lead single, Push It.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
but yeah, I like that album a lot. But going back to like songs from films,
Yeah,
um,
yeah.
uh, I think one of the songs people don't talk about enough, maybe because the film was terrible, was Smashing Pumpkins' "The End Is the Beginning Is the End" from Batman and Robin.
Oh yeah, that song was good and that movie was awful.
Yeah, yeah. I went to see it because I was a huge fan of Uma Thurman at the time and tried to see all the films she'd been in.
Oh yeah,
But
of
like, she
course.
didn't have a great run of films in the late 90s.
Yeah, poor thing. But
Well,
you know, she
she
got
was in the
redeemed.
Kill Bill films. She
Yeah,
did
with
pretty
Kill Bill
well.
was great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, and I suppose she'd already done Pulp Fiction. I mean, the fact that like I think any of the lead actors from Pulp Fiction could easily have gone on and had like terrible careers after that and said, yeah, but we were still in Pulp Fiction.
Yeah. Pulp Fiction. Oh, going back to Bono writing songs for movies, was Hold Me, Thrill Me, Kiss Me, Kill Me written for that Batman film?
Oh, I don't know. Um, I have read about it and I can't remember what I've read. But I don't know if it was or not. Um, but it was, I mean, it was the strange thing about the Batman films was as they got worse, the soundtracks got better.
Got better, yeah.
Like Prince's Prince's soundtrack to the first one is I've always found it a bit forgettable, but the first one's probably the best film. And then Batman
Oh,
and what was
definitely,
it?
yeah.
Batman Returns was pretty good. And then Batman
Hmm.
Forever was sort of when it started taking on a slightly more comic-y kind of role. It
Right,
wasn't a bad
exactly.
film, but the soundtrack was
Mm-mm.
good. And then Batman and Robin, not a great film, but I remember the soundtrack. I don't remember what other bands were on that soundtrack, um, but I do remember the Smashing
Oh, I
Pumpkins songs.
remember. Yeah. Oh, sorry. I was going to say I remember that on the same soundtrack that Hold Me, Thrill Me, Kiss Me, Kill Me's on Seal was also on that soundtrack.
Kiss from a
The
Rose, yeah,
Kiss from a
yeah,
Rose.
which that had already been a hit in the
That
UK.
was
So
already
like,
a hit. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, I think I don't know for certain, but I wonder if they put it on that soundtrack to get it some international recognition.
You,
But
you know,
it had already been a hit over here.
yeah, that one had already been a hit. And I think we I think we've talked about this one before, both of us again being Radiohead fans. The Romeo and Juliet soundtrack, I can never remember, but exit music is played during the end credits of the movie, but it's not on the soundtrack.
Yeah, but
Which
on the
one of those
soundtrack.
songs was actually written for the movie? Because one of them was written for the film and one of them had already been
Now,
written
I believe exit music might have been written for the. Yeah, I think exit music might have been written for the film,
and
but
then
then for
ended
some
up on
reason
the
on
album.
other they couldn't get it on the soundtrack. And that's why it ended up on OK Computer. Like,
Right.
yeah, because there were a couple of films like Lucky. That was the strange
Uh-huh.
thing for me. Was like Lucky had already been released. People had already heard that song. So, I mean, I
Yeah.
remember thinking I was going to have to buy the compilation that Lucky was on, and then I found out, oh, it's going to be on OK Computer, and I don't know if it's a re-recording of Lucky or not, but it's sort of, and maybe they were sort of working on it for OK Computer and thought, well, let's put it on there. But um, um, yeah, that was a good soundtrack. There's another film I'm trying to think of that had a really interesting sort of indie soundtrack. Well, I'll tell you what, I don't know if there was like a particular song that is well known from the film. But do you remember the film Singles?
Oh yeah, of course.
Like very kind of grunge era film by
Yeah.
Cameron Crowe, and so like Smashing Pumpkins and Pearl Jam are on there. Um, I suppose there isn't really a well-known song from that film. Um, so it doesn't really count with what we're talking about. What about City of Angels? So the film City of Angels, it was sort of, I remember going
Oh
to see it
yeah.
with some friends and it was sort of all right, but the soundtrack, it had three songs. Um, the most famous of which I think was the Goo Goo Dolls song Iris.
Yes. Yeah.
That was on there. And then
That
there
was
was
really
another song I'm trying to remember it. And then the third song was Alanis Morissette's song Uninvited, which is one of her best songs, I think.
one of her. Oh yeah, I love that song so much. I love Alanis. I love
A
that
great
song.
song. Did she have any songs? She didn't. I don't think she had any songs besides that one that was from a movie.
I don't think so. Not that I can. Yeah, not that I can think
Oh, the song
off
I'm
the top of
thinking
my
of
head.
was a Sarah McLachlan song called Angel. That
Yeah,
was the other.
yeah, that one. Yeah, of
But I
course.
think the Alanis song was by far my favorite that
Oh,
I had from that
definitely,
soundtrack.
definitely. Yeah, that whole soundtrack was very, very sad. Just very
Yes,
sad.
yes, it was an
Beautiful
extremely
movie,
sad
very
film.
sad.
Yeah, there are very every now and again you get a film that comes. I was just reading yesterday about this film from the 2000s called something like £7, and it just looks like the most depressing film.
Oh,
And I thought I'm not going to watch it. But it's but I don't know. That kind of film is for people. There are people for whom that's their film. You know, that's their kind of film, and I don't want to. I don't know. I don't want to kind of shit all over that, as it were. I don't want to make someone feel like there's something wrong with their taste in film if that's the kind of thing that they enjoy. And I did like that Alanis Morissette song from City of Angels, and I quite like the Google Dolls song as well. But I especially like the Alanis song.
no, absolutely. Yeah, she's just the best.
Yes.
But if we're talking about movies a little bit, obviously there's a lot of films about musicians and bands and some documentaries. Some I like documentaries a lot, but I also really dig, some of the biopics are pretty awesome. Like we were talking about Johnny Cash earlier. Joaquin Phoenix did an amazing job playing Johnny Cash in Walk the Line. That movie was fantastic.
Yeah.
And it had Johnny Cash's stamp of approval too, which I think is really amazing. Um, and the way that they performed his songs and everything, it was just, yeah. I mean, that's a really, really good one. Um, and then you have like, but that, obviously that's like a biopic, dramatized a bit, but totally based on his real life. And then you have like a sort of documentary-ish thing like the Dandy Warhol's Dig, which I
Oh,
don't know if you've
yeah. That's a
seen.
great. That's I've seen Dig.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you have seen it. Oh, good, good, because that's just an amazing. Like they're telling their story, and it's just, it, yeah, what a wild and crazy adventure
Well, I went
that
to see
is.
recently. I went to see what was it? Oh, Meet Me in the Bath, the documentary about the New York post-punk era at the beginning of the 2000s.
Oh yeah,
Have you
yeah.
seen that?
No, I haven't. How how,
So
how
it
is
was
it?
sort of following. It was following like all the kind of
You?
the explosion in the post-punk scene, like bands like The Strokes, the Yeah Yeah Yeahs, the
Oh
Moldy
yeah.
Peaches,
Yeah.
Interpol, TV on the Radio, LCD Sound
Mm-hmm.
System, all these bands sort of coming from the same, all coming from New York about the same kind of time. And
Right, right.
about how and it links it in with 9/11, and it sort of linked it in with the way in which kind of uh, art got the city through 9/11. Um,
Mm-hmm.
there was a really interesting, just there was what was I thought it was really interesting in the film, something that I at the time I used to buy the NME, and I was really into a lot of those bands. And I got to see the Strokes in New York in 2001, like a few months after 9/11. And that was quite a cool show. And they were supported by the Moldy
Oh wow.
Peaches. That was really good. Um, And I've seen the Yeah Yeah Yeahs a
Wow.
couple of times, and I've seen Interpol. I've not seen any of the other bands I just mentioned. I've seen like the Yeah Yeah Yeahs, Interpol, and the Strokes.
I've
And
seen TV on the radio. They're one of my favorites. I
yeah, I'd
love
like to
them.
see that. But I wanted to say, like, one of the things that I saw in that documentary, I never realized just how the extent to which the media attempted to sexualize the women in those bands, especially Karen O, and that
Oh yeah.
she talks about how like press photographers would like take upskirt photos and things like that. And
Hmm.
I remember at the time, because the only kind of contact I had with those bands was through their music and through the press. And the way that the
Right.
press portrayed her was sort of a bit like a more sort of Courtney Love figure, very
Hmm.
kind of sexually confident. And that the documentary, watching the documentary was quite eye-opening because it's sort of like, I know she's not like that at all. She's quite
Hmm.
shy. She's kind of get one of those people who they get up on stage, not to get over being shy, but because they're shy, but it's a way for them to perform. You can almost kind of become a character. You know,
Yeah.
you can get away with doing. I had a singing teacher years ago who said to me, one of the great things about being on stage is you can be a bit of a dick. People expect you to be a bit of a dick. They expect you to be a bit arrogant, to be a bit of a poser, because that's sort of where you go to get away with that. You're already up on stage. You're already demanding people's attention, so you may as well
Yeah,
make the most of
exactly.
it. And yet, it was really interesting to see that era of music through the from the perspective of the artists rather from the perspective of the journalists.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And that's why I love watching music films like that too, because, you know, how many times can we bring up Radiohead in a conversation that you and I are both having together? But
Mm.
meeting people is easy, you know. That one's
Yeah.
a that one's pretty
Yeah.
eye-opening.
I think there'll be so this is one of those questions that gets asked a lot whenever this kind of thing comes up. There will almost inevitably be a documentary, sorry, a biopic about Radiohead.
Yeah.
So who plays Tom York?
Who plays
And
Tom York?
don't say Tilda Swinton.
Don't think it's Tilda Swinton. She can play anyone.
Yeah, but
Or
also
Meryl
there's
Streep. No,
photos that have
kidding.
been taken that make her look a bit like Tom York. But no, yeah, actually,
Actually,
that's a good point. Tilda Swinton could probably play anybody.
no, she really can. Actually, what's really gorgeous, I don't know if you've seen this, but the picture circulates around Facebook and stuff every now and then, and it's one of my favorites. It's Tilda and David Bowie dressed as each other.
Oh, I
And it
think
is
I have.
one of the most perfect things you have ever seen in your life. Like the two most androgynous people on the planet dressed as each other. It's beautiful. It's one of the most gorgeous things I've ever seen. I'm a big fan of Tilda. I love her. Yeah, but she really could play anyone. Who would play Tom York?
See, I've got one
Oh,
who could probably. I think that it's a bit left field, but Seth Green.
oh, you know what? That might not be bad. I
There's
like
no
him.
reason
He's
why he couldn't play a serious role.
not at all. As long as he
And I'm
can do
always
the
really
accent.
interested in. I'm always really well. I guess that's the problem, isn't it? The accent. Um, but
Oh, you
talking
know
about
who might?
biopic, the
Oh, you know what? Wait, I think I have one. I might have one for Tom. What about this might be a little left field too, but also an amazing actor who can do almost anything. What about Sam Rockwell?
that would be interesting. Like I actually think that if they were going to do
I've seen Sam Rockwell in
biopic
real
about
life. He's not
Radiohead,
that
then
tall.
they'd have to either
He's
do it in
taller than
sort of
Tom.
three stages, like 90s, 2000s, 2010s, or they'd have to pick a particular moment. And I think the only if you're actually going to have any real drama there, it's got to be the period between OK Computer and Kid A. Like
Oh yeah.
that would be the most interesting period to make a film if you were going to make a film about Radiohead. If you're going to concentrate on that, because
Okay, do you
they're
hear us,
following up one of the
people? We
most
want a
critically
Radiohead talking about
acclaimed
radio.
albums of all time. One of the albums that at the time people were saying was maybe even the greatest album ever written, or at least one of them. How are they going to follow it
Yeah.
up? And they already knew that whatever they were going to follow it up with wasn't going to sound like OK Computer.
Yeah. Yeah, there we go. All right. We've thrown it out into the world. This is what we want for, for a Radiohead documentary. Um, well, let's switch gears
Let,
a bit.
let me actually, there's one more thing that I wanted to bring up about biopics before you
Oh,
change the
sure.
subject.
Sure.
Um, One of the things that I sort of simultaneously loathe and love about biopics is there's this trope in every biopic, or nearly every biopic. I didn't notice it in Oppenheimer, but in nearly every biopic, there's this trope where, say, the main character is struggling for inspiration, and then something random happens and it just gives them the idea that they need. And so, for example, there's that bit you mentioned, the Johnny Cash biopic. There's the bit
Hmm.
where he's knocking on the door. Reese Witherspoon's character has just gone inside a hotel room, slam the door, and she's like, "You better walk the line, Johnny Cash." And he's like, walk the line. And it's that kind of
Yeah.
thing. And there's a great sketch by the English comedian Harry Enfield where he kind of parodies this, where it's like things like Beethoven is trying to work
Right.
on his new symphony, and he's like, "Oh, I just can't seem to figure it out at all." And then his housekeeper's there. She goes, "Oh, ha 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 ha," and then walks off, and he's just like, "Ah." And it's something that you'll never be able to unsee this now in every single biopic. You will notice that,
Yeah.
like, and there's little bits that are sort of like that, like in the Freddie Mercury biopic. There's a
Oh
bit
yeah.
where like Brian May and Freddie Mercury are having an argument, and then the bassist starts playing the bass riff to Another One Bites the Dust, and there's
Hmm.
just a sense that either that's how it happened and they're playing it accurately, but more likely they're just sort of creating one of those moments, and it's a very particular
Hmm.
trope that you only ever get in biopics, which, by the way, was satirized brilliantly in the film Walk Hard, the Dewey Cox story.
Yes. Which is also a fantastic movie.
Yeah, the fact that every like he keeps sort of whatever the different style was of that particular decade. He kind of, he starts out being like a country star, then he's obviously more like the Beatles, and he becomes sort of more like
Hmm.
Led Zeppelin, and he becomes more like some other kind of band, and so on.
Oh, well, that's like
Um,
Spinal Tap is famous for.
yeah, yeah,
Spinal
yeah.
Tap goes through all of those different genres, which is probably the best. I mean, that's probably the best mockumentary ever.
There's
I,
also one more documentary, a biopic. Actually, it's not a biopic; it's a documentary. Um, and I think it's called Running Down a Dream. It's a 4 hour documentary about Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers.
yeah.
And I believe each hour kind of covers a different decade of their
Yeah,
career.
yeah. Hmm.
As I remember watching it in the 2000s, and they've been going since about the 70s, I think.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah.
and it covers them like right from when they first got together and decided they wanted to be in a band, and then drove to LA to try and get a recording contract and things like that, all the way up to like Tom Petty. Okay, going back to our first like film songs from films, his
Yeah, yeah.
song "Walls" from She's the One. I always
Yeah.
really liked that song. I thought that's a great song.
Yeah.
But yeah, like that's a great documentary. That's not a biopic. That's a documentary.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, there's plenty out there that I haven't seen either that I just have like a backlog of different biopics and well, specifically about musicians that I want to watch. Um, but what I wanted to switch gears to, um, was like just the fun of like one hit wonders, whether it's like a single song or because sometimes that's all you need, let's face it. Or like just a band that had one great record, but then didn't do anything else. Like, isn't there a famous joke about the Stone Roses Like the first album was great, and then after that,
I think
it was
I think the second album's sort of been reappreciated, and that there are songs on there now that we've sort of people have decided actually it's not a bad album at all. It's just there was so much anticipation for so long. Like I think it was like a 4 or 5 year wait, and there was all sorts of problems that they had as a band that sort of by the time they came around to releasing it, um, Britpop, like proper Britpop, had really started. So like Blur, Pulp, Oasis, that sort of thing. A bunch of sort of
Mhm.
younger bands influenced by the Stone Roses, um, and in some cases with a sort of heavier, more sort of serious sound. And but I don't know, I wasn't really there at the time. Like that, '94 was when I started to kind of listen to my own music. When I started to try and find
Right.
music myself,
Yeah.
and that wasn't really on my radar. But I'm aware of that, and I'm like where the Stone Roses are concerned, the first album seems to be considered um way more highly than the second.
I just remember when there's that scene in Shaun of the Dead where they're first encountering the zombies at Sean's apartment, and they're trying to figure out how to kill the zombies, and they fling a record at him, and so they
Yeah,
start going through because he doesn't want to fling his good records.
yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
so at one point, um, Nick Frost's character, he's him and Simon Pegg, they're like going through, and he pulls out the Stone Roses second album and he flings it, and uh Simon Pegg just plays Sean. He's like, no, 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 no. And he goes, Stone Rose, he goes, it was the second album, and he goes, but I liked it. Like it was okay to throw their second record, not the first one.
It's interesting to me when
Um,
you get a band that when they had more than one record, but there's really only one record that they're remembered for, and that none of
right,
their
right.
other records made any
Yeah,
kind of impact at all.
and that could be considered sort of like a one hit wonder sort of thing. Like if there's just one album. I'm
Yeah,
trying
it's the
to I'm
album equivalent.
yeah, the album equivalent. I'm trying to think of like a really good example right now.
Yeah.
But like there's definitely okay, so I don't know if this is necessarily the same in England, but I'd say a band like that might be like the Arctic Monkeys. Like their
They're a
first
difficult one.
record.
In England, they've been huge for a long time. They've been like a festival headlining band. They're not at all one-hit wonders here.
Yeah, and but I think here it was like it was something like I remember I was working at a record store in Central New York at when that first record came out, or maybe it wasn't their first album, it was the first album we heard of. And the single dropped like 6 months before the album came out. And that was a little unusual. Like it's not unusual at all now. But at the time it was. And um everyone kept coming in and asking for this record, asking for this record, asking for this record to the point
Mm.
where it got really, really obnoxious. So, of course, we made sure that we ordered a little bit more of this album than we would normally order. And yeah, I mean, it sold like hotcakes. And then after that, like all interest in that band was lost. And now, granted, this is here, and it was, I was at the record store, it would have been around like 2004-ish, something like that. 2005 maybe. Um, and yeah, I don't know. So yeah, I guess they don't really qualify, but here they might as far
I
as that
guess the thing
goes.
about America and Britain is, and I mean, generally speaking, this is something that I think that British people don't always appreciate about America. But when it comes to something like, if we just think about it in terms of music, where you
Mhm.
guys are concerned, you know, music that comes from America is a bit like talking about music that comes from Europe, and we tend to
Right.
sort of compare because we have a kind of extraordinarily what's the word I'm looking for? Like disproportionately large amount of music that comes out of England and does well internationally. Um, we think that, well,
Mhm.
it's sort of the same in America, but actually, I mean, if every single other country in the world stopped making music, there would probably be more than enough music to keep America going for several lifetimes.
Oh yeah.
Um, and I mean, when it comes to stuff like hip hop, for example, America is almost drowns out all the other countries, even though like most
Yeah.
other countries do have their own version of hip hop. But
Yeah.
but going back to what was it, Arctic Monkeys,
Yeah.
I never really got into them. But what I
Yeah.
noticed with them is that their first album sounded very unique. It sounded unique. It didn't sound like anything else that I'd heard or that anybody else had really heard. But as they released more and more albums, they started to sound more and more like another band.
Hmm.
And Alex Turner was still a good lyricist, still quite a witty lyricist. And like he's another one where I'm not necessarily into his songs, but I do quite like his lyrics. I quite like him as a storyteller.
Yeah.
Um, but um, but I think that what happened with them was they had one album, and that was the really interesting album. And then from that, they kind of had dedicated fans, and they had people who kind of came along a bit later on. But I don't know, maybe it just maybe it was too English as well. That's another thing. Like there's various bands from England that have struggled in America because they're too English. Like Oasis always kind of struggled in America. And then the Manic
Oh,
Street Preachers, who are actually Welsh, always struggled in America as well.
I would say, well, I Oasis did just fine here. I would say Oasis did just fine here because, like, there was a point in college, and I, I know anyone who knows me knows my feelings about Oasis, but there was a
I
point in
don't think I
college
do
where
actually. What do you think? Do you not like Oasis very much?
if I hear Wonderwall one more time, um,
Oh, I don't like. I mean, if we were talking about songs we don't like by bands we like, Wonderwall would be one of the first songs that I would bring up. I've
yeah,
always liked
so
Oasis, but I just don't like that song at all.
that album, What's the Story, Morning Glory, when I was in college, it was just on repeat everywhere. You could
Yeah,
not escape it, and I didn't want to hear it anymore. So it really, really, really soured me on Oasis, and I would go back to my own room and blast Blur. You know what I'm saying?
yeah, yeah.
So I'm like, no, give me coffee and TV, or otherwise I'm gonna lose my mind. Um, yeah, no, can't. Well, actually, one note though, one awesome Oasis thing, going back real quick to the way songs are used in movies. That song "Fucking in the Bushes" is used in an amazing scene in Snatch. And every time I hear that song, I will always think of that movie. It might not be that hard of an association for a lot of people,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
very, very English movie with very English music, and that's a great scene. Um, and that song was used brilliantly in that movie. So I will
yeah,
give props
yeah.
where props are due. You know what I'm saying? I'll definitely give props where props are due.
I think like one example of is not they're not quite a one-hit wonder, obviously, in England where albums are concerned. The band Travis had two really big albums.
Yeah, they
But
did.
then they continued to release albums, but it's sort of the style of music moved on. Like very like between their third and fourth album, sort of between about like 2001 and 2003,
Yeah,
the
yeah,
style went from that sort of very atmospheric kind of stadium indie sound
yeah,
to a more sort of rough kind of Libertines, um, uh, what's the word, garage rock kind of sound.
yeah,
And I
yeah.
think that bands like Travis kind of lost out. And the only band from that era that's really still going strong is Coldplay.
Right. And we
Um,
love
and
Coldplay on this
and
podcast.
they didn't they were interesting because I still remember hearing that first album and thinking, I'm not that sure about this. Like it seems like an album you have on in the background. And there are a couple of songs I
Yeah.
really liked. but the rest of it I wasn't that into. But it was the second album that really got me, and I thought, oh, they've really like matured as songwriters, and they're really starting to take this more seriously. But it is interesting where like bands like Coldplay, Radiohead, U2, REM. There's lots of bands that
Mhm.
clearly are learning to write songs by making records,
Yeah.
and you can see that they're getting better and better and better, and they're really working hard and trying different things.
Yeah.
And like I always try and stand up for Coldplay whenever I can. I'm not as
Yeah, me
much of a
too.
fan of their more recent stuff, but
Yeah, same. I could
like
agree with that.
not none of their albums, no two of their albums sound the same, I think.
Yeah.
And they're always able to have like one or two pretty good songs off of each album. I think it's only really the most recent album from a couple of years ago that I thought wasn't quite as good as their others.
Yeah, I
But
completely agree with
I
that.
assume because none of their albums sound like any of their other albums, whatever they release next, hopefully, will sound different. Um,
Yeah. Yeah, the
but I mean, they're
constant
the opposite of
innovation.
a one hit wonder band. Like they're a band that's just managed to just keep going and going and going.
Well, and there's another thing though when we're talking about like a band like Travis or something, they weren't really a one-hit wonder, but they were also like maybe a little underrated, because they were good. And like I think there's a lot of bands like that when you were, mentioning it's like, well, yeah, the Manic Street Preachers didn't get the credit that they deserved, probably, especially in this country.
Yeah,
But
I think in your country, in England, they definitely did. In England,
yeah,
they've
yeah.
always been a big name band, and
But
for
I
a
think,
long
but I
time they
think
were a
there's some
headline
bands
band.
that like fly under the radar and they're almost like, and this could be a little bit more maybe an American thing, but like there's some bands that are like almost like cultishly cool, like you have to know about them, and if you do, you're gonna love it, but not
Mm.
everybody's heard of it. Like a band like OK Go. I love
Okay,
OK
yeah,
Go. I think
yeah,
they
I
are
like OK Go.
so brilliant. They're great songwriters. Their music is amazing. Their music videos are mind-blowingly
Yeah,
awesome. And
yeah,
and I have so many friends that are into so much good music, and I have to introduce them to OK Go. I'm like, you guys, this band has been around for almost 20 years. Like, I don't know what to tell
yeah.
you.
Like their first, I remember hearing their first single in 2002 or
Yeah, here
single,
it
hearing a
goes, right?
single of
Was
theirs.
that the
No,
that
no,
was the
no, that
big
was
oh,
Get
that was the
Over It.
big for oh, get over it. I
Yeah,
see. I think I got turned on to them with Here It Goes. That's when I like heard of them for the first time.
there
And
was
then I saw
another
that
song of
treadmills
theirs.
video and I was sold.
There was a song of theirs that I became aware of when I was probably, I let me think, around sort of 2010, but it was from a few years earlier before then. I can't remember what it was called. I don't know if it was around the same time. I think it was just before they started doing all the kind of uh, uh, what's it called, the orchestrated videos and stuff like that. That's not the word I'm looking
Yeah.
for. What's the word I'm looking for?
The
Choreographed
the
videos.
choreographed
Choreographed
videos because
videos. Yeah.
they're very intense. Yeah. I mean, it's like it started with the treadmills and then like it just evolves the marching band video. Okay, so
Yeah.
for listeners who don't know what I'm talking about, they're all on YouTube. Just go check it out because they're amazing. The
Mm.
one that kind of went viral in the first place that really, really put them on the map is just Google OK Go on treadmills, and you will be
Yeah.
treated
Yeah.
to a delightful video of a
Yeah.
song called Here It Goes Again, or Here It Goes, I think is the actual
Here
title
it
of the
goes
song.
again, it's called.
Yeah, yeah, Here It Goes Again. And then there's another video that I really, really love. Um, OK Go Marching Band. That will be the song This Too Shall Pass. It's beautiful. And what I
Marching band.
love,
So
yeah, the Mar
I thought this too shall pass was the video with the giant what's it called? Rube Goldberg device.
oh no. Oh no, they might have done two for that one actually. There's a marching band video for that one.
They
It's
did.
amazing.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Um, and because there's a couple different versions of that song, but I have to say that one of the things I love about their music videos is they use practical sound effects for the music in a lot of their music videos.
Yeah.
And so they do this two shell pass with a marching band, and I almost like that version of the song better
Oh,
than the
okay.
album version. Um, and then uh there's another one that's really good. Okay, Go in a Car, and that will get
Well, that's the
you
one in the desert. That's I think it's
the
called
needing getting
Needing
video.
Wanting.
Needing
Needing
wanting or
Wanting or
needing
something. Yeah.
getting.
Something like
It
that.
yeah,
Yeah.
I think it's I
They've got
always
like hundreds of pianos all set up in the
oh
desert.
yeah, oh yeah, and they have this pimped out car that like beats on these
Yeah.
instruments as they drive through a
Yeah.
track. It's
Yeah.
incredible. And you can imagine they had to get that right because well, watch the video and you'll understand why that had to be
Yeah.
one take.
Yeah.
So it's pretty insane. I
Yeah,
think
they're
they're
a band that's
underrated.
flown under the radar. I saw a video on YouTube about how okay go so they're sort of a one-hit wonder, but sort of not. They're one of those bands that like if you're just like the music that you hear on the radio or see on MTV or
Mhm.
whatever, you probably see them as a one-hit wonder. But if you're kind of more into music, then you'll know their albums and you'll know their records. And I mean, been I've been following their career since about 2010, I suppose.
Yeah.
Um, I'm trying to think of some other examples of like it's difficult to think of bands. Like there's always bands that are touted as being like the next big thing, and then they have
Mm.
a really interesting debut, but they just don't manage to follow up on that. There was a band from the late 2000s, a Scottish band called Glas Vegas, and they were in the um, same kind of style as bands like Jesus and Mary Chain and the Ravenettes. They
Oh
were sort of
yeah.
creating a Phil Spector kind of wall of noise sound, but with like rock guitars and stuff. Um, and the guy had quite a thick Glaswegian accent, which isn't always easy to understand.
Right.
But their first album was fantastic, but I don't really remember a lot of their second album. I don't remember it too well at all, and I think that for whatever reason it just didn't work quite as well. Another band, I don't know whether this you're aware of this, it was a UK band in the 90s, only released two records, a band called the Long Pigs. They had a song from a film. They had a song on the Mission Impossible soundtrack, a really
Oh
beautiful
really?
song, On and On.
Huh.
Um, and their first album, like was called something like The Sun Is Always Out, I think. And really great album. Loads of hits off that album. They were really popular in the UK. Everyone was really excited about their follow up. And then when they released their follow up a few years later, it was quite inaccessible in a lot of ways. Like it was this much stranger album that just didn't seem to kind of follow a lot of songwriting conventions. And they kind of dropped off the radar. There was a band called Ultrasound who they were sort of like prog indie.
Mm.
They released a double album called Everything Picture in 1998, and I got to see them live, and they were fantastic. And then they disbanded, and then they released their second album something like 15 years later.
Oh
And
wow.
I mean, it was an album of sort of indie songs. It wasn't close to what they'd done before. Like the one they'd done before was sort of you get about six or seven tracks on over like on one CD and then what six or seven on the next CD. And some of the
Yeah.
tracks would be like the songs might be 7.5 minutes long, or there'd be like an instrumental, or it was definitely in the vein of bands like Pink Floyd and that kind of
Mm.
thing. Where like I actually the other day I did something that I've never done before. I listened to Dark Side of the Moon for the first time, start to end.
Oh wow.
Um, and it wasn't what I expected it to be, but in a good way. Like I thought it was because people used to compare OK Computer to Dark Side of the Moon. I
Oh
thought, well,
right.
okay, it's going to be an album of sort of songs that have a kind of theme to them. The songs
Right.
are going to be a bit sort of floaty, a bit drifty. They're going to experiment around with a few sounds and stuff. I didn't realize actually, like Dark Side of the Moon is much more like a soundtrack album, almost like
Hmm.
a soundtrack to nothing. I mean, I listened to it because I saw the. I've been aware for a while of the theory that it was written as a soundtrack to The Wizard of Oz.
Right. I was just gonna
Um,
ask you if you've heard of that.
yeah, well, that was why I decided to listen to it because I thought I've never listened to the album. I am aware of a couple of the songs from there. But I do think it's
Well,
really interesting, and I
if
think
you've
it's
ever
something that
done it,
I wish there were bands that would do that sort of thing now. Like I wish there were bands that would sort of say, because we seem to be in a kind of more pop based era, and I think that
yeah.
I'm hoping that we'll go into a more almost a progressive kind of. But the problem with prog rock was always that if you were not like, it was quite exclusive in a way that you sort of had to
Hmm.
be knowledgeable about music, and you had to have sort of money and access to the right equipment.
Right,
And
right.
and
Yeah.
it was kind of, and a punk emerged as an alternative to prog rock. It's like, here's a guitar, here's how to play three chords, go and start a band.
Hey guys, sorry about that. We just had a quick little sound issue, but we're back. So Alistair, you were talking about Pink Floyd,
Yeah.
Dark Side of the Moon, and having listened to it through, and how, there was a theory that it was maybe written for The Wizard of Oz. Uh, if you've never done this, I know a lot of my friends have. I have in the past. It's actually pretty cool. After the third lion roar at the beginning of the film, you hit play on the CD player, and you will be surprised at how well the music syncs with the film until the end of the album. So, um, it is trippy. It's very trippy. But yeah, you just shut off the sound on the movie and watch it with Dark Side of the Moon playing, and I know loads of people have done this. I know there's some listeners giggling right now, like, hey, yeah, that was a fun night, because it's super trippy and it's really, really fun. If you haven't done that, I recommend it. It's a fun evening, and you get to watch The Wizard of Oz and listen to Pink Floyd. So you could do worse things with your night. You know what I'm saying? Um, but oh yeah, because we were kind of talking about some buried things. That would be a buried thing. Um. Things that we think are kind of underrated. That's what we digressed into some Pink Floyd there beforehand. But yeah, like we were talking about OK Go and some other bands like that that are, just really great. And they have these long careers that are successful, that they get to do whatever they want. They tour, they make these amazing videos, and like not enough people have heard of them somehow. I'm not sure how that's possible. Don't know if do we have any more examples like that? Were there any other ones that you wanted to discuss in that
Um, what do you
realm?
mean?
Like as far as like a band like OK Go that's like
Oh,
just
right.
has like a
Well, there's
storied
a whole
career,
load.
but it's just not as well known
Nearly
as they
anyone
should be.
can list a few bands like that. I mean, for me,
Yeah.
there was a Scottish band, Idlewild, that I always liked.
Oh
And they
yeah.
sort of grew in
Idlewild.
popularity in the indie scene in the late 90s. And then they had an album in 2002 called The Remote Part, which looked like it was going to be, like it wasn't going to, it was going to be like their, how do I put this? Like, when you get a big band and they have an album that gets them noticed, and then they follow it up with a huge album.
Yeah, yeah.
Like
Yeah.
REM had Green, and then they followed it up with Out of Time, and then they followed that
Yeah.
up with Automatic for the People, and so
Yeah.
on.
Yeah.
But sometimes you get a band and they release, say, three albums, and then they release an album, and people are like, "Oh, this is really interesting. Okay, I want to see what they do next." But for whatever reason, they don't manage to quite match up to it with their follow-up. The sad thing with Idlewild is I think they matched up to it with the follow-up but one. They released
Mm.
another album a few years after that. So they released an album 2002. Then they had another album about 2005. And then about 2, 3 years later, they released another album. And it was that album that I think should have been, by rights, the album that made them like household names, but it didn't. And that's
Mm.
just sort of how it goes. But they're one of those bands that, like, they were a punk, a sort of punk, post-punk kind of band. Um, but the lyrics were really interesting. Like, I don't
Yeah.
really know how to describe the lyrics. There were lots of kind of deliberate contradictions in the guy's lyrics, and it was a really interesting style that he used.
See, in that vein, you're making me think of, you had mentioned before, LCD Sound System.
Right.
I love LCD Sound System. I think James Murphy's brilliant, and I think that that's one of those bands artists because it's mostly him, but he has like revolving band, whatever. But definitely underrated. Like, how do more people not know about LCD Sound System? Like, I don't understand. The music's so good.
Well,
It's like
you say you've not
solid.
seen them. You've not seen
I've not seen
the
them live.
bathroom,
I've
right?
just seen like
No, no,
I've
no. You've
seen.
not. You said earlier that you hadn't seen the documentary Meet Me in the Bathroom, right?
No, I haven't seen that one yet.
That a large part of that focuses on James Murphy and LCD Sound System, and
Yeah.
him founding DF. Is it DFA Records?
Yes.
And then
Yes.
about how the various problems he had with that, and about how he sort of he did a gig as a favor to some friends. He just sort of came over to London and he cobbled a band together,
Hmm.
and it sort of just happened to be the case that like the NME were there, and they heard the gig and thought, right, there's something really special about this act. There's some of their tracks that I like. The one song that I really like by them is the track that never gets played called North American Scum. But
I
like
love
there's
that
other stuff
song.
that I heard, and there's one that I heard the other day, and I don't know what it's called because I think it's an instrumental.
Mm.
And then there was a remix that he did of a song by MIA. That was quite well known, I think. Paper Planes.
Yeah.
It's his remix of Paper Planes by
Oh
MIA.
yeah. Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah. Yeah.
then I believe he worked on one of Arcade Fire's albums as well. Like at one point,
Oh.
he was going to produce their album Reflector, I think, but he wasn't
Hmm.
available.
Oh, interesting.
And apparently the reason why, like they've got, I think it's a documentary film made about them called Shut Up and Play the Hits. And the reason why it's called that is because there's a gig where apparently Win Butler from Arcade Fire just shouts out, "Shut up and play the hits."
Wow. Well, you and I both know that one of our most favorite bands, back to Radiohead one more time, was in danger of being a one-hit wonder because of Creep. They play that song until the end of the show so that people wouldn't leave right after hearing it.
Yeah.
So, you know, what goes around comes around. Well, with that being said, kids, remember that one good song does not a record make, but listen to the rest of the record and, make some decisions because there's some great bands out there that deserve more attention. Go watch an OK Go video, and while you're at it and you're popping around on YouTube, like and subscribe to our channel. Listen to us on iHeartRadio and Spotify. Alistair, as always, been a pleasure.
Thanks for having
And
me,
I know
Andrew.
we will talk again soon. Yeah, of course. Bye for now, guys. We'll talk to you again later.